This is great. I'm gonna spend the rest of our podcast time. I'm just gonna read this silently by myself, and I'll give you guys the updates as I go. Right?
What would that podcast be like?
I could
just read along with somebody.
Well, what if I could read it and do it in like yeah, an audio book? I could do it in a funny voice.
There's copies of copies everywhere in a funny voice. That would be hilarious.
I could be like Kermit the Frog.
Go ahead, let's try it out. So what's up, everybody? Welcome. It's the Stamp Paid podcast number 3. We're here with our cousin, Alec Farmer.
Great to be here.
Man of many talents. Not that this has a particular topic, this conversation, but like the general topic is going to be, well, Miyazaki, obviously. And then I'm interested because we briefly talked about it before, but never in depth, but the differences in Japanese and Western cinema.
Interesting. Okay, yeah,
what
absolutely.
Would you say are the main differences? Because I remember you telling me one thing about plot and character and like...
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's a lot you can go into. I mean, obviously, they're pretty general strokes you'd have to take on either side for approaches to cinema and storytelling in general, but there are differences, absolutely regional differences I'd love to get into. But I'm also curious, you just watched some anime for the first time yourself, right?
Yeah, real anime. Well, I don't know.
Well, what do you mean real anime?
So one of my favorite shows of all time is Avatar, The Last Airbender.
Yeah, I mean, Avatar is 100% inspired by anime. Yeah.
Inspired by, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I watched my first anime.
Well, what did you watch?
Upon your recommendation, I watched Spirited Away, Princess Mononoke, and then I watched a couple episodes of Attack on Titan, One Piece, and one other one that I can't remember.
I know, you just told me what it was too, and I can't remember what it was. But regardless, so you watched Spirited Away. Had you seen any of Miyazaki's films before, or was this your first time?
I watched one when we were living together that you were recommended. It was...
Shoot.
I want to say it dealt a lot with like dreams and dream state, and there was a dream sequence that you wanted me to see.
A dream sequence? I'm trying to think if I can, off the top of my head. Do you remember any of the plot of it? It's okay if not.
I remember zero of the plot.
No worries.
But so this was kind of like my first time, and this was the first time that so like I watched the shows like the One Piece and Attack on Titan. I kind of just watched those cold, and then I did some reading on like Miyazaki and Japanese cinema, and I feel like that definitely enhanced my experience of watching Miyazaki's films. Yeah,
I mean, so having never seen a Miyazaki film before, apart from the one I made you watch at the previous house, that neither of us can remember the name of, but what were your general takeaways? Did you enjoy your first experience with Miyazaki? Was it what you were expecting? How did you feel about it?
It wasn't what I was expecting. Not that I was expecting something specific, but it just took me by surprise in general. I will say, upon like my first watchings of them, watching them like cold, we'll say, I enjoyed it much more after having some of the context and kind of just knowing, I guess, what to expect from anime and from Miyazaki's films. Like just the gaps in the plot logic and all the holes he leaves was confusing at first, but then once I understood why, I loved it.
Well, I'm curious, so because I've kind of come to my own thoughts on the reasons why, and I've heard a whole bunch of different scholars talk about why. I've even heard Miyazaki talk about his approach to storytelling and this kind of organic, more of a character-based, kind of disregard for rules of the world type of approach. But I was curious, like, what did you think of that, or even like the readings that you were coming across? What were they saying about that?
Well, a lot of it was like interviews with Miyazaki, so it was what he was saying. And what did I think about it? I loved it. Like, I had a lot of questions about it, but just from what I could understand, I felt like I'm glad both things exist. Like, I'm glad there's the Western style and then this style. I feel like maybe it's just new, but this style seems like there's so much more possibility. And the fact that you're not necessarily like confined to a 3-act structure, and the clip you included on hard world building versus soft world building was very helpful, and it like let me see kind of all the possibilities that you that soft world building.
I know it's a tough one to get out.
Yeah, that opens up. It's like one thing that Miyazaki said that I really loved was he, I don't know if it's because, but one of the benefits of leaving the spaces is that it gives the viewer the opportunity to fill it in with more themselves and their own experiences.
I mean, that was like, so as a little bit of background on myself. So I've loved Miyazaki and anime since I was a little kid. My favorite film as a kid was Spirited Away. And one scene I remember so vividly, even to this day, first time watching it, is Chihiro has to go from the bottom of this bathhouse structure all the way to the roof where Yubaba, who's the witch who runs this bathhouse for the spirits, lives. And as Chihiro's getting in this elevator, she gets out on the wrong floor and she kind of peeks her head down. You just get this little glimpse into these rooms, and they have a bit of like silhouetted with all of these different figures behind them. And as a kid, I was so fascinated with what was happening behind those windows, and the amount of like ideas that I sprung up, again, things that probably had absolutely nothing to do with what Miyazaki had intended, but it just drew me into this world so much, and I was kind of building this world in my own head, probably very differently from any other person who was experiencing it as well. And I think that, especially as a kid, having media that challenges you creatively and allows you to think creatively is so important, and it's something that really drew me in and made me fall in love with Miyazaki. And then throughout the rest of my childhood, then watching films like Howl's Moving Castle and Ponyo and Totoro, right, where he has these same ideas throughout in each one of these worlds. Even something like Totoro, which is very based in the real world, it still has this fanciful, fun rule set where you can be creative and can experience this story in a way that's very unique to yourself. That's something that's really amazing.
Yeah. One thing, well, there's a lot off of that. I guess I'll start with one thing that I was wondering, and you would be like the perfect person to ask, is because like, would you say the plot is allowed to unfold more fluidly?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So in that, and then like well, okay, so I guess I'll start with, I experienced the same thing you just described. It's like watching one of Miyazaki's films versus watching a Western film. A Western film feels like being in class. It's like, okay, there's going to be the structure. I feel like there's information I'm going to need to understand in order to understand what's happening in the story. Where Miyazaki's film, it's more like challenging. Like you said, I mean, it allows you to engage with it creatively yourself. And like,
yeah, and not to say there's anything wrong with having the more defined approach that a lot of Western media gives. I think that, like you said, it's super important to have both of them, and they both offer very different things and allow you to engage with the media very differently. But yeah, there is something that is pretty lovely, especially when you are younger, right? Or even maybe not even when you're younger, because it's great to engage creatively with media at any age.
yeah,
But I think especially as a kid, being given that space, being given that opportunity to really imagine this world, which is already such a unique and really beautifully realized world, and be able to really make it your own and really immerse yourself in it, I think is super important for kids. And also very important for us as adults. It's something every time I watch these movies, I'm just blown away with not only the creativity on screen, but what that inspires me to think about myself.
What does it inspire?
God, well, let me tell you, it makes me always want to go out and make stories and want to create media in different ways. I think there's nothing more inspiring than seeing a world that feels so like fully lived in, and imagining the stories that take place within this world, right? It may not even be the stories on screen, or it may not even be characters you see on screen, but having this this beautiful fantasy world that invites you to create more stories within it. I think that's super inspiring.
Yeah.
Especially somebody who I think all of us here at the Stamp Paid podcast, we all want to tell stories, and we're all storytellers in different ways. So I think that media that allows you that room to engage creatively is super important to have.
Definitely. What do you mean different types of media?
I don't know. What was the context I said that in?
Just in like the opportunity to create different worlds or different stories within these worlds?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, so like for instance, I need to think a little more on this before I give a definitive answer. But I think that Miyazaki's films, even though he does really capture the beauty of cinema, right, in the moving image, and I think that inspires me to want to create media that may not be like restricted just to film as well. It's like, I don't know if did you ever end up going to his exhibit at the Academy Museum?
No, I forgot all about that. No.
No worries. I mean, I'll show you. I have the book that has all of the parts of it. But the one thing that really stuck out to me is for Princess Mononoke. Miyazaki wrote these poems about the world, as well as like the tree spirit, or like the spirit of the forest, as well as the I can't remember the name, the Kodomo doll, or the little guys with their head that shake back and forth.
Yeah, I don't know what their names are.
The tree spirits, those little guys. Yeah, but he wrote these like beautiful poems about this whole world, and even just reading these poems on their own, I felt fully immersed in the world, and there were aspects of it that he was exploring that weren't really. I mean, they were present in the film, but it wasn't things that I was really even thinking about. And then re-engaging with that, I was like, wow, it's amazing how he's able to take all of these different forms of media and these different forms of storytelling and, you know, layer them into such a cohesive but organic and flexible world.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
It is. I definitely want to keep studying how he did that.
Yeah, I mean, he's just, one of those few people who's just like an artist through and through, you know? Like, he's a person whose like sole goal is to create. It seems like... you know, he announces every few years, he's like, all right, I'm done, I'm retiring, I'm out. He did it first, I'm pretty sure he did it first with Princess Mononoke. He's like, all right, I'm done. And that was back in the 90s. And he came back and he did, you know, 3 or 4 more films. And he's like, all right, I'm out. And then 2 years later, he's like, all right, I'm doing another short film. And we're like, okay, one more short film, great. And he's, never mind, I'm coming back, one more feature film. And now he's making another feature film.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think so many great artists do that?
I mean, it's when you see Miyazaki and you listen to him talk a lot, you see that he is, you know, it takes a lot out of him, and that he's constantly thinking about the work that he's creating. But there is such a strong drive to create. I mean, there's a quote. Oh, I wonder if I don't want to butcher it. But he's talking about, you know, his creation. He said, if I can give people entertainment and joy, then, you know, it was worth me being on this earth, right?
Wow.
And I think, you know, for some people, I'm sure they hear something like that, and that's pretty cliched, but I think that he genuinely means it,
It
you know?
seems like it. I mean, I feel like it comes through in his work.
Yeah, and he even talks about, like, his films, even though he's so passionate in telling these stories, he, you know, talks about filmmaking as cursed dreams, right? Which is a really interesting idea, because he talks first about, you know, the creators of, you know, like airplanes in particular, right? These are people who had the dream that humans could fly, right? And it's a really like beautiful, profound dream, right? But then obviously the tools for airplanes have now been used to create some of the most horrific weapons known to man. And he, you know, talks about that in the sense that these beautiful dreams are always going to be taken up by the industrial state. He even refers to that within his own animation, right? His own filmmaking is that, you know, these stories of his, and even the way, you know, that you approach film and filmmaking is going to be taken up by this industrial state. And used for, you know, purposes that you may not have wanted or even intended. But that's why he calls them, you know, filmmaking and even dreams just in general, you know, these are all just cursed dreams because they're going to be, you know, appropriated for different reasons.
Damn. It's kind of pessimistic.
Yeah. He's a super pessimistic guy.
He is, yeah.
Yeah. Which is crazy because his films, again, have such a lovely sense of optimism and hope for the future. I mean, he talks about a lot. There's a quote of his that's quoted a bunch, where he says, you know, he doesn't want to make films that teach children to despair and run away. And I think that even, you know, Miyazaki is somebody who is very pessimistic about the state of the world and the state of people around him, but he also has a lot of hope and future for the world. But yeah, he's just a lovely guy. If you, there's a documentary on him that's so good. It's called The Kingdom of Dreams and Madness.
That sounds good.
And it's all about him. It's supposed to be his last film, The Wind Rises. And it's a behind-the-scenes look at the creation of it. And in it, there's this scene where Miyazaki, they talk about like what he does like when he's not, you know, in the studio. And he just goes down to his local river and just picks up trash. Damn. On the weekend. Yeah, that's what he just goes down and does.
That's cool.
And he'll go and he'll visit the little elementary school, and he'll put out like little figurines from his movies from them. And I'm like, this is just a genuinely good person, you know?
Yeah, that's awesome.
He did also, a lot of people do like to bring up that he famously walked out of his son's movie and was like, he's sitting there, he's smoking a cigarette, and he's like, this movie has no passion, there's no life in it.
Damn, that's hardcore.
It is hardcore. To be fair though, I mean, I think it comes from a place of love, even if it may not seem that way, because, you know, not to say that his son's movie wasn't great, but it's something that I personally didn't connect with. I think a lot of people couldn't really connect with. It felt like it wanted to be a Miyazaki film, but it didn't have its own voice.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, Miyazaki really wanted his son to create something, you know, wanted him to create his own work. And it's something that he's allowed Miyazaki, or Goro, his son, to do. And it wasn't like he made this bad movie. He's like, all right, I'm cutting you off. You're out of the family. You know, go find your own studio. After that, you know, Goro continued to work with Studio Ghibli, and Miyazaki actually helped him write his next film. You know, so there was a continuing collaboration. I think that Goro has become a far more, you know, unique filmmaker than in that first film. He's kind of developed his own voice. And obviously he doesn't have the same legacy or repertoire as his father, but I think that's for the best, you know, that he's...
Yeah, I mean, that must be a hard...
Yeah, trying to be, Miyazaki's your dad, and you're like, I want to be a filmmaker too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it.
I can't see myself doing it.
That's a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure, and also, like, not to say that it can't be done, but it just seems like, in general, the sons of people who have, or the children of people who have, like, virtuosos, let's just say, like, people who have kind of created something new in the world.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, especially if, like, you're rewarded monetarily for that. You don't really grow up with a lot of the experiences that you need to create, like, culture-changing art. It seems like. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's just the trend that it seems like.
Yeah, it almost feels like you're doing it, I don't know. It's a hard thing. I think also it's harder now to create, you know, culture-changing art in general. I think because...
Yeah, I mean, that might not have been the right word.
No,
yeah,
no, I get what you're. No, I get what you're saying. I just feel like it's such a different landscape now that we occupy. There's so much content and media that's being created constantly.
So much.
And it's so hard to really kind of figure out your own voice. And I can only imagine having your dad be such a virtuoso and people expect you to kind of follow in his style. And there's such a proliferation. I mean, there's such a proliferation of content that is already done in Miyazaki style anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
So to be honest, will Goro become the next Hayao Miyazaki? No, but that's all right.
Well, he shouldn't. He
should
be his
absolutely,
own person, his own thing.
And I think that's for the best. He recently did. Actually, his last movie was terrible. It was awful. I couldn't get through it. But he's done some good stuff, let me tell you. Again, not everyone needs to be held up to the standard of Miyazaki, where every film you put out is a masterpiece.
Well, yeah. I mean, and I don't think Miyazaki would describe his own work as that. Like, that's part of anything. Getting good at anything is making a lot of crap. And then some of it's good, but you get better over time.
I know, but you go through his filmography from beginning to end.
Okay.
It's literally all perfect. Like, there's not like...
Miyazaki.
Yeah, there's not like a bad film, or even like his first TV show I started watching from 1977. I'm watching like, it's a children's like adventure show. I'm watching, this is fucking awesome. Like, this is so good.
Really?
Yeah, everything is done. Even his first feature film was Lupin the Third, right? And Lupin the Third is an ongoing like spy adventure series, like manga anime spy adventure series, right? And I was like, okay, this is a long running series at this point, right? Like, this is a character who's been well established. This is probably gonna be the least Miyazaki film of the Miyazaki catalog. And I watched it, I'm like, God damn it, this is still a Miyazaki masterpiece. The man, like, his imprint that he leaves on all of his work is just so strong. And like, I mean, that film, it just has such a like fun, playful energy that is like wholly Miyazaki. The way that the music interacts with the scene work, everything about it, his approach to animation that's so, you know, fluid, but there's such a like great intent behind it. I'm like, the man just doesn't miss. He's never missed, and it's not fair.
How do you think that's possible? And like, do you think I mean, to never miss is crazy. I was gonna ask, like, does he just not release his misses? Like, is there a lot of crap that just stays in the studio, and then what we get is this final refined piece? But how is that even possible over a whole career?
Over a whole career? Well, I mean, I think the other thing is with animation, it is a much longer process. You know, every single frame is hand drawn, right? You're spending years and years of your life working on these.
Okay.
And so I think, you know, he's pouring a lot of passion into his films throughout it. And maybe, I mean, when you watch him as he's animating, he is constantly, you know, tearing things up, throwing out paper. He's getting like constantly frustrated. I think he has such a drive to his vision and to the, to create the vision of the film. That I don't think he really compromises much. That was like for his last film, The Boy and the Heron. When he announced he was coming out of retirement, I remember people were like, "Oh my God, when is it coming out?" And this was like a year or two after he announced it. They were like, "Well, we've been working for a few years on it. We're about 10% of the way done with the animation." And they were like, "Oh, you're not gonna, nothing faster to get Miyazaki's film." I was like, "We're gonna go as slow as we need to make sure that this is right." That's the other thing that I find super interesting is that Miyazaki doesn't like write scripts for his films.
Really? What does he do?
He storyboards them all out. So he goes through, and he finds it, which I guess really makes sense for animation, right? Because it is like fully a visual. I mean, film, narrative, live action film is also like a visual medium, but animation, everything lives within the hand-drawn element of it. Everything has to be created by, by hand, by pencil, by paper. And so I think it makes sense, but yeah, he's just got such an amazing approach to storytelling. And that's the one thing I also love about animation in general, is that you're not like capturing these physical things, right, in the world. Like on this podcast, we're filming you and me sitting on this couch, right? A lot of this is just things that exist in the world. We have the couch here, you and me are just wearing the clothes that we had on. But in animation, every single one of those things is an active choice you have to make, right?
That's a good point.
And not only that, but because you're not actually filming the real things, you can approach it as more of an abstract idea. Like, what is the idea behind this? There's a Miyazaki quote that was in the notes where he's talking about his animators were like, well, I don't really know like how to animate fire. Like, what does fire look like? And I think that's so interesting because there's so many ways to approach animating fire. Like in his new film, The Boy and the Heron, it starts off with this pretty, harrowing sequence where a boy's mother is in a hospital that has just been firebombed during World War II. And as he's running down the street, it literally looks like the world around him is melting from the flames.
Whoa.
And it's obviously nothing you'd see in real life, but he's capturing that emotion, that feeling through the animation of it. And I think that's what the world of animation gives you that live action doesn't, is that you're capturing the ideas behind the things. You're not capturing them themselves, right? And so the way that an animator can approach it can vary so drastically from one thing to another.
All right, so I have like a burning question that
burning for fire. That's good.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Look at that. But this is something I've been trying to figure out with like Bass and Stampede and what we're doing is I feel like to express like the feeling of these art forms, like these sports or whatever discipline it is, the feeling of them, the essence of them, like the full cultural context and history of them. I feel like we need to develop some new art forms, like to really encapsulate like what surfing is in a single art piece. And not that you ever will, but like that's what you're pursuing is like each artwork, like each film is pursuing, I'm going to capture the feeling, whatever. So like, I think we need to develop new art forms to do that. And it just seems like with this crazy paradigm shifting times of technology and everything that's happening right now, it seems possible. It's like how do you do that? How do you capture the essence of, or I guess a better question is like all right, let's start with this. This is one question I had. In anime or just like in Miyazaki's work, I know you said he storyboarded, but like if the plot is more fluid and you're not confined to this 3-act structure, how does that affect the entire creative process from like ideation to, I guess, animation or recording or creating it, and even then to editing? Like, how do you edit something if you don't have a set idea of how the plot's going to turn out?
Yeah, well, I think that goes back to how animation is done. Because with animation, you're not editing the same way that you would with live action, right? You're not, animating beyond the edges of a cut, because that would just be a lot of wasted time and effort. Because animation is so expensive and time consuming. Okay. So when you're starting out with the storyboards, you really are like, the storyboards is your first cut of the film. Okay. And then so from there you'll take that, and then you'll have rough passes of the animation, and then from there you'll have cleanups, and then from there you'll actually have like the final finished piece. But I think that in general, having more of like a fluid, organic, approach to the filmmaking, I think I think it's helpful in a lot of ways in that Miyazaki, like you can see throughout his process, there's not to just name drop a bazillion documentaries and films of his, but there's a series that NHK did called 10 Years with Miyazaki, and it's literally just 10 years watching his creative process across 2 different films, right? And so it's pretty amazing to watch him as he's making these films, and you think that, you know, he has such a singular vision, but he'll see something and it completely changes his mind, or he's like, oh, this is not the film I wanted to make, or, you know, even being able to be open to changing things throughout the process. One thing I also love about him is that usually he'll start his film, he'll create a singular image, right, that he'll, you know, draw out or, you know, paint over, and then that singular image is, this is the film. This is the film I'm setting out to make, and he has this one image, and from there he goes out and he makes the film.
Okay.
And that is the inspiration for the film, is the singular image. But the interesting thing you were talking about with bass, and I've been thinking about it too, is that I was going back and rewatching some of our capoeira footage, and I think that it's a lot of fun, especially because we did approach it in a very loose sense. But I don't think we really captured the intensity or that feeling of being with a group of people, you know, practicing this art, really dancing with one another, right? And I think that it's because it is such a full-bodied experience, right? With that, you have the music, you have the movements, you have just the energy that you're passing off from one person to another. And I think that you can capture that in film, and I think you could capture that in animation as well. But I think it takes a level of mastery and a dedication to craft, to really immersing yourself first in that experience, understanding that experience, like with the Miyazaki example, really understanding, like, what does fire look like when it burns? What does it feel like to, you know, have the world around you melting, right? And then being able to take that mastery of craft and approach that, okay, how does it feel to be, you know, partaking this particular dance or this art form or this martial art, and then how does that feel, you know, on screen? How do you capture that? And, you know, again, not to rag on Hollywood, but I think that sadly Hollywood a lot of times, especially, you know, well, not just Hollywood, but I think there's a lot of films that approach, you know, martial arts, and they think, oh, I just want to, like, show as much, you know, flashy hits as possible, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't really capture that feeling, you know, that not only the intensity of it, but the community of it, right?
Yeah.
The feeling, again, I was just standing behind the camera filming you guys, but even just hearing the beat of the drums as the mestre came out and started hitting it, and then everyone started, you know, playing the music. You guys were in the circle, and everyone was just kind of like, you know, finding this dance together with one another. And so it's something that I think that, you know, that we should continue to work on, and even, you know, use Miyazaki as an example of somebody who has really, you know, mastered the craft of having these experiences, real life experiences, and showing how do I translate the specific motion, the specific idea into film.
Here's a question I had based on, like, the fire note that you included, and how, like, well, first, no, we don't need to get into that. But how did they not see fire in their life? That's crazy.
That's a good point. I mean,
what? Even
yeah.
a candle?
I mean, yeah, maybe it was a specific type of fire, because I feel you. It's one of those things, I'm sure that they've seen fire.
I mean, maybe not. So, like, this is my question, is how do you think the value of experience, like real world experience, is changing as, like, paradigms of art and consciousness with AI, like, how all these paradigms are changing, and the world's becoming more and more digital, or at least you have the opportunity to exist more fully in a digital world. How do you think the value and the role of real world experience is changing in art?
Yeah, well, I think that art, not all art, but I think especially like film and multimedia creation is becoming more and more derivative of itself, which is something that Miyazaki has talked about a lot. He talks about animation being cursed because, you know, filmmakers and animators, they're not having these real world experiences to build off of, you know, in that, you know, in the instance there, to be able to animate fire or to show like, the feeling that comes across when you're animating fire. Or for us, you know, working within film, if all I did was watch film and watched film and TV, if I sat down like, all right, I got to make a documentary on capoeira, I have no like real world basis for doing that apart from having seen it in film and TV. And I think it's what a lot of the content you're seeing, especially on like social media, and not to say there's anything, because we're making content for social media right now, guys. But you know, a lot of it is kind of all created within this like insular bubble, if that makes sense. And so all of this feels like it's playing off of itself, and it's not really bringing anything deeper to the art, which is something that Miyazaki has warned, you know, a million times against. that the art should be able to bring in either real world experiences or allow you to experience something that you're not seeing in the real world, right?
Yeah.
Versus just having the same thing done over and over. How many times can I see the video? Top 10 times or top 10 craziest headshots in Fortnite videos, like, again, I think that there is a time and a place for content that I can just kind of turn my brain off to, like low calorie content. But the fact, I think that more and more people are using that as their main source of content.
Yeah.
And not to say that that's necessarily bad. I think that there's room for both. Because let me tell you, it is nice sometimes just to be able to sit down, turn off my brain, and let my Fortnite clips play out,
Yeah, definitely at times.
Yeah.
But it's just like, you said low calorie. It really is like
Yeah.
the nutrition you put in your body. Like, you have to have balance.
Absolutely, yeah.
You need like quality nutrition, and then sometimes you can go have Burger King.
Sometimes. I think you mean every day you can go have Burger King. That is an
you,
exception, yes.
You're a freak of nature. I don't know how you're still alive eating that all the time.
Well, it's because the
You and your
Impossible
brother.
Whopper is just, it's built different, let me tell you. It's the greatest sandwich known to man.
I'm gonna actually try it. I haven't had an Impossible thing.
I thought I made you try it at the last house.
I don't think I tried it. Did I?
It's so depressing. I ate it so much there. I've made everyone try it, so. Regardless to
I'll try
say,
it
yeah,
next time I'm
you by the next podcast recording, you will have tried the Impossible Whopper, and I want the full review.
But I can't wait. I gotta get those chicken fries too.
The chicken fries are pretty awesome.
That's all I remember those and that long chicken sandwich.
The long
from
chicken
Burger
sandwich,
King.
yeah, that was just like the mayo caked on it.
Yeah.
It was awesome. Yeah.
If you went to a right location that had the right amount of mayo, it was fire.
I think even with the mayo caked on, it was still pretty good.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. It was hard to mess that up.
Yeah.
Well, all right, so going off of kind of everything we were just talking about with Miyazaki's work, I feel like his work is very ecoceptive in a lot of ways. Like, one, just the reverence for nature and how he would like physically portray nature as these deities, like the forest spirits and the river spirits. I thought it was beautiful how he did that, and it's also very like ecoceptive. Like, oh, you were, yeah.
Yeah, I was behind the camera.
Okay, yeah. A couple other things you just said made me like point to other examples of that. So this might be a little detour, but have you ever heard of the philosophy of morphic resonance?
I have not.
So it was this English, his name was Rupert Sheldrake. He was an English like parapsychology researcher. So it's all kind of like pseudoscience. It's not necessarily proven. But he had this theory that basically objects have memory and like places have memory because certain patterns of nature repeat themselves. All right, so it's a spatio-temporal connection whereby the more often a self-organizing process takes place, the easier it will be for it to take place in the future. So he had like his theory was that like the reason why like some haunted houses are haunted if somebody got killed there is because the house like remembers that, like that energy is infused into that physical object. I feel like Miyazaki, I mean, totally independent of like the concept of morphic resonance, but I feel like he kind of portrays that in a lot of the animation.
Well, I think this goes back to the question you asked earlier, which is like differences in Western and Japanese approaches to filmmaking and storytelling in general, because Miyazaki is following within a Japanese tradition, right? And in the Japanese tradition, you have this idea of Shintoism, where these individual pieces of nature, right? Rivers, streams, rocks, all of them have these kami or these spirits or gods, that do have memories of these locations, right? And so there's millions of these gods that are worshipped in these locations. And so I do think that we're talking about, it is shown there, and I think that's part of a longer tradition within Japan, and I can't speak to the rest of East Asia, but definitely within Japan.
Do you think that comes from the Shinto tradition?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it exclusively comes from it, but absolutely, I think that you can definitely see those traces of Shintoism within Miyazaki's work and within Japanese storytelling throughout history.
Why do you think that is? That was a question I had on just if we're gonna paint with broad strokes, like, and draw a big dichotomy between Western cinema and, let's just say, Miyazaki. The differences in the approach of storytelling, where do you think that comes from? Like, has it always been there? Like, I was looking at examples, and one person pointed to the example of like the terracotta warriors versus, well, all right, that's not important, but like that was just an example of how, like, of collectivist versus individualist cultures. Like, East Asian cultures tend to be more collectivist, and they value
Yeah,
things
absolutely.
differently.
Yeah.
And I guess the terracotta could be an example of that. But that's just one example. So, like, why do you think that this? Because, all right, so one of the things that I really loved and that I think ties directly into what we're doing is like the dichotomy between these two styles of filmmaking that can really illustrate differences in how our culture, like, and culture in the sense of it being like the fishbowl that you're not aware of,
Yeah.
how that influences literally how you see the world and how you move through the world. But where do those differences come from? Like, if you had to trace the cultures of Japan and America back, why do you think there was that divergence?
Well, I think there's always, I mean, I think there's always been a divergence in thought, and I think that happens just naturally when you have these civilizations that have sprung up, across the world from one another. The ideas in Miyazaki's work, and even, this more fluid, approach to storytelling is present in Japanese works, dating classical Japanese literature, things like The Tale of Genji and Heiki. These are stories that may not be fully coherent, but there's such a strong tone and theme and message throughout them, right? And I think that the way that they tackle these stories, again, it doesn't really follow like a very linear, 3-act structure. We're not following a hero's journey with any of these, but they're almost like a series of anecdotes or stories that illustrate these larger messages that deal with things like collectivism versus individualism, right? And not to say that that they don't share similarities. I think, in particular, Japanese cinema and American cinema actually borrow and share from one another quite a bit. If you look at a lot of the early samurai films, they were inspired by early Western, like Westerns by John Ford, and they still have this kind of It's a weird hybrid where you have these stories that have these lone samurai who come in and will, save the town, or will, I guess, like more of like what you would associate with like the Western cowboy, right?
Yeah.
And so these two like storytelling traditions aren't, I think, totally like opposed to one another, but they've just sprung up in different parts of the world. And I think as we get deeper and deeper with globalization, you're going to see storytelling that borrows from them. It borrows from each of them more and more. Like you were talking about Avatar earlier, which is 100% inspired by East Asian animation, and even its approach to storytelling, I'd argue, is inspired by Japanese animation, and so I think that they sprung up differently because of these cultural differences. But as we continue to have a more and more globalized world, that they will, these differences may become less and less apparent. I mean, even like now, it's crazy the amount of anime like sponsored things or created things that we're seeing in the West here. Like recently, McDonald's is doing a collaboration where they're like, all right, we're doing McDonald's, but the anime version of McDonald's, and they create like a whole short film around it, and
What is the anime version of McDonald's?
it's called WickDonald's with a W.
It's like McDowell's.
But that's the funny part about it is, so, I mean, this is a super silly tangent, but McDonald's is actually present in a lot of anime when they're trying to like have characters go into McDonald's and they don't want to have to use the
Really?
licensing of McDonald's. Yeah, it's McDonald's.
That's funny. That's something I wonder about a lot, though. I would love to get your opinion. I first asked myself this with surfing, and how surfing sprung up independently in civilizations all over the world. Oh, well, first, before I ask you that question, just a little piece of data that might be interesting to you. What's his name? Robert Sapolsky, in his book Behave. One of the things he looks at is he tries to like explain. Well, he does it like he starts with like the neurobiology and then goes to the genetics, and then he traces like the genetics of why the genetics and the culture of like Western and East Asian are so different.
Wow.
One of the things he suggests is that it's the ecology of each land, like the prevalence of rice paddies in East Asian culture. It takes a village to like
Do the
till,
harvest and
to do the
yeah.
harvest. It takes a lot of labor to do that. So because like their society and their culture and their civilization developed doing that, that's where this whole like collectivist culture comes from. Just a hypothesis.
Is it a book or?
Yeah, the book is called Behave
Okay.
by
You said
Robert
that, yes.
Sapolsky.
Yeah.
It's a very it's a heavy book.
This is not a low-calorie content type of book.
Yeah, it's right there if you want to look at it.
Well, now, okay, you got to
Let's
eat
look
the
at it.
Impossible Whopper, and I'm going to have to read this book by the next time we record.
Oh, you're not reading this by the next time we record.
I will thumb through a page or two by the next time we record. There it is.
It's a big one. And it's like, it's not, you have to like science. Because like I said, he's explaining the extremes of human behavior. And he starts from the land. His whole point is that like, if you ask the question, why did the chicken cross the road? There's going to be a different answer if you ask like a neurobiologist, an endocrinologist, a historian. So he examines like so many different levels of analysis in this book. So it's heavy, but it's hugely like informative and
Well, this is great. I'm going to spend the rest of our podcast time, I'm just going to read this silently by myself, and I'll give you guys the updates as I go. All right?
What would that podcast be like?
I could
Just read along with somebody?
Well, what if I could read it and do it in like yeah, an audio book. But I could do it in a funny voice.
There's copies of copies everywhere in a funny voice. That would be hilarious.
I could be like Kermit the Frog.
Go ahead, let's try it out. Okay, so the question I had was surfing. So like surfing, we think of it as starting in Hawaii, which like the modern day Renaissance can be traced back to Hawaii. But it sprung up independently in civilizations all over the world that had no communication with each other.
Our YouTube short that we said that, or Instagram short, people did not agree with us. But continue, yeah.
Only a couple dummies, bro. And y'all could, I talked to them. They said it was cultural appropriation. I was like, what's being appropriated? I know you're not supposed to engage with crazy
internet
people
trolls?
in the
Yeah,
comments,
no,
but I was like, let's see if this idea is bullshit. Like, let's test it out. And I didn't think that their criticisms held up. But
They never do.
I mean, that's a historical fact. It sprung up independently. Like, Peru developed it in like 1150 BC. And then it was in Africa. And like, it sprung up independently all over the world. And so now we're kind of losing that, like with globalization, and you can FaceTime with somebody in China instantaneously. Like, we're kind of losing the ability to discover things independently, whether that's art, science, whatever. So there's benefits and drawbacks to that.
Absolutely,
Like the benefit is obviously like, I think it's good to meld cultures and like for cultures to blend together. That raises the issue of cultural appropriation. So just what's your opinion on all that? Like, as the world becomes more globalized, what are your feelings on cultures merging together and then like also losing the ability to reach conclusions independently?
Yeah, I mean, I won't go too deep on this just because I haven't, it's not something I've really engaged with too much. But I think that there is a way to approach, learning about other cultures, learning about the world with a genuine, curiosity and search for knowledge versus use. I think lots of times you can smell when something is done for, say, malintentions or for the intention of appropriation. And sometimes people genuinely just don't understand what is appropriation, what is not. And I hope that people have an open enough dialogue where to say if I were to appropriate something, somebody would let me know, hey, maybe you should be approaching it or do it in a different way, right? And I think having that open dialogue is really important as we kind of navigate a world where we're being exposed to a lot more cultures and identities that you may not be familiar with, but making sure that you approach it with open curiosity. But I think that obviously, the fact is like we're only going to continue to see more and more of the world and have these identities merge deeper and deeper into one another. And I think just having an open dialogue about it is important. Again, I don't have too many deep thoughts on this, but
Yeah, no, I don't know if I do either. That's why I tried to ask it where it's like just how do you feel about it? What are your thoughts on it?
That's what I got for you. Yeah.
That's a great answer. That's a beautiful answer.
I think it's the safe answer. That's the politician's answer I just gave you.
No, it doesn't feel like a politician's answer. That feels like what we actually need to do.
Yeah. But it's one of those things where like I say that, but it's like, how do you do, Alec? How do you do that? How do you approach it? And how do you have that? I don't fucking know.
Well, it's also hard because it's like you can't control what other people do.
No.
So you could. I mean, I think we always ask for that. Like I know us three ask for honest feedback, but sometimes like people will give you feedback, but it's not honest. It's coming from a place of
Yeah.
whatever, like heightened emotions, so it's not true. And
That's one thing I
you
hate.
can't control what other people do.
Working a lot in the development side of Hollywood is there's like every Hollywood executive's job is seems like their job is to give notes, regardless if it's notes that like, and which I think is good. It's a good thing to have notes, but let me tell you, just giving notes for the sake of notes, it feels so silly. I don't know. Like at that point, like I understand it's your job, but it could also be your job to say, "This is wonderful. This is great. I love your vision." No notes. Anyway, that was a tangent for tangent's sake.
When does that ever happen?
No
you would
notes.
like that?
Well, I'm saying if you don't actually have a genuine note and you're scrambling for one because it's your job,
Oh, yeah.
that's silly.
Yeah. That's like a symptom of so many different,
Yeah.
like the whole productivity versus being busy.
Yeah, it's stupid.
It's just that.
Yeah.
It's like people want to try to justify their,
Again,
simplify stuff. People.
yeah. Like, if I have to show up for less hours out of the day and like be more productive in those hours, that's awesome.
Yeah. You would think so, right?
I do think so.
Word. All right. Well, the last thing that I wanted to ask, like that I had prepared, I forgot to ask with the ecoceptive part. But one thing that I feel like, or I guess I should quickly explain what ecoception is, so this could be like a standalone thing. So ecoception is a working term. It's kind of a hypothesis I have right now for a sense that I believe we have. I kind of came to it from learning about 3 senses that we definitely have. These are like scientifically established things. There's interoception, which is an awareness of what's going on inside your body. There's exteroception, an awareness of what's going on externally. And then proprioception, an awareness of your body's movement through space. I feel like ecoception is an awareness of the effect that your presence and behavior has on whatever ecosystems or systems you're a part of, whether that's like a relationship, a family, a school, a society, the world. I feel like Miyazaki really touches on kind of those on a lot of different scales, but especially the relationship with nature. And one thing I loved about, I guess both of the movies, kind of giving nature a, what is that word? Would that be anthropomorphizing
Yeah, they're.
nature? Like
I mean,
taking nature and putting it into this like creature that he drew from his mind, his imagination. I think doing that and making them creatures that are able to fight back, that's what it was. It was the boars. When,
the boar guy. Yeah.
Like that mean lady that wanted to take over the whole world, and the people started clearing the forests to get to the iron ore.
Yeah.
And then the boars like fought back, and the people started shooting fire arrows, like flaming arrows, at the boars who were just defending their homeland. They were just defending their home. One thing that I thought was so beautiful about this method of telling stories is it really like brought me into stark, like it brought me face to face with how oblivious our species can be sometimes. Like just for whatever reason, the way he animated that, it just made me think like, what if in our species, this is almost like all we do. This is our pattern. Like, what if instead of when we go and destroy somebody else's home and they like defend it, instead of us fighting back, what if we stop for a second and be like, oh wait, another creature lives here. Like they're just defending their home. Let me say, you know what, I'm wrong. I'm gonna bow out. Sorry about that. But no, we start wars and all that. But the thing I loved about like Miyazaki's anthropomorphization of nature is you get the chance to see what would happen if nature could fight back in like a more radical way than it does now. Because nature's gonna win. Like even if all humans die out, the earth is gonna survive, like barring black holes and all that. But like nature does fight back. But I think it was cool how Miyazaki, we got the chance to see what nature would do, like if it could fight back and if it was this actual being that could fight back against like the destruction we're causing it. I just thought that was cool, and it might, if that was real, not even if it's real, I think Miyazaki's films are, and art is a chance for us to find a way to coexist with nature.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely. I mean, the main character asked the question multiple times, like, why can't we just live in
Yeah.
peace and harmony with one another? And I think that there is a dichotomy that that film strikes, that humans, like, there's almost like a natural response in us to want to claim and take things over. But I also love in that movie, because like you talked about Lady Eboshi, right? And how she wanted to take over the world. But one thing I love about Miyazaki is that she's not a bad person.
Yeah, he does have like
Yeah, I mean,
nuanced character.
while she's trying to destroy the forest and kill the forest god, she's doing it because she wants to support her village that's filled with women that were once in brothels that she bought their contracts of, and people who have leprosy, right? And so people who have been outcasted by the world, who are all like, and she's trying to do this to support them, to give them a foundation. And so that's one thing I do love about Miyazaki's works, and I think it even speaks to the concept you're talking about, right? These are all these individual communities that interact with each other in different ways, right? And seeing how they interact with each other, not just in the stark, black and white, good and evil, that they are all nuanced, and that, the way we interact with nature, the way nature interacts with itself, the way that we interact amongst humans, they're all like so, nuanced and full-bodied. And I think it's so important to see that in our media. And I think that Miyazaki, he never lets anything just be easy black and. Oh, I say that he does have a few films where it's like Laputa Castle in the Sky. The character and the main villain in that is like a comically evil guy. It was like, oh yes, I'm here. He's a mustache twirling guy. He's like, yes, I'm going to take over the world, and I'm going to use this innocent young girl to do it. And it's like, okay, you're just a bad guy.
Yeah.
But I think, especially the deeper you get into his career and filmography, it's not bad people doing bad things. They're just people who are doing things, for their own, for reasons that are justified to them.
Yeah, that's a great point. That does make it harder.
Yeah.
What do we do with that as the consumer and a creator of art?
Well, I mean, there's a quote, I don't remember off the top of my head, but I think it allows us to engage with media and engage with the world more critically as well. We are all just people trying to figure out what it means to be alive and what it means to coexist with one another. And I think that obviously there are people who can do horrendous things, and I'm never trying to justify any of that. But understanding that we are all just people, that we're doing things for reasons that are, may seem justified to us. And how do we engage with each other based on that? Because at the end of the film, the main character, the end of Princess Mononoke, Ashitaka decides, I'm not going to live within the forest because I'm not from the forest. I'm not part of the forest. I will go live in Irontown, and I'll do the best I can to, make sure these two areas can live, and cohabitate with one another, right? I think that's not to say that Hollywood would do this, but I think it's a very different, a very more impactful ending than just saying, I'm going to go live with the forest and I'll build up the forest, instead, going to go live with this community that's almost seems opposed to the forest, but trying to find a way to bridge that gap. I think that speaks to a lot of Miyazaki's, what's the word I'm looking for? Not ideology, but beliefs. I don't know. Philosophy. What other words I can throw out right now?
Spirit.
Spirit, yeah.
His, ethos.
Ethos is that's. I think that's the one I was looking for. So,
words. What words? What's the word we're looking for?
I think ethos is good.
Ethos.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess this is part 2.
Part 2, yeah.
Of episode 3 of the Stamp Paid podcast.
If we were more established, we'd have the ad break in between those two parts.
I know.
We could just do an ad anyway.
I mean, this episode is brought to you by Behave.
Behave, yeah. We'll do a 2-minute section of me just reading a passage out of the book as Kermit the Frog, yeah.
Y'all were talking earlier about, like what kind of content would that be?
Yeah.
If you're just reading them, like, it's called an audiobook.
That's true, yeah.
Just reading the books, that'd be great.
But it's a video audiobook.
Audiobook.
You have to look at me staring right at you as I'm doing
different
it.
voices.
Yeah.
I mean, that's great. Just clip together a bunch of shorts.
Yeah.
You get the whole book in succession. No, but so this episode we're talking, I guess specifically about Miyazaki. Take it out another level. We're talking about just kind of cultural storytelling or filmmaking specifically between Japanese culture, just a more Eastern worldview ethos versus a Western ethos, and then connecting it to a lot of the dynamics of the just kind of the mission of this project that we're working on. So I just want to do, I mean, yes, it's a disclaimer, but it's also really like a part of who I am. Like earlier in the discussion, there's a conversation about appropriation. So like I do want to acknowledge we are talking about Miyazaki. We're talking about Eastern culture. Like all three of us are well, you were actually born in the UK, right?
No, I was still born in the U.S.
You were born in Colorado?
Yeah.
We have the same birthday.
Yeah, we do, yeah. 2 months later, we moved to the UK, though, but...
Okay, got you. But even if you're born in
Yeah,
the UK,
still Western, yeah.
That's worse than being American.
Yeah.
I'm joking.
You don't have to be joking.
It's a joke, y'all. But we are through and through Western people. Yeah. So just before I get into the questioning about the specifics of the conversation, I just kind of wanted to articulate what I see the mission of our company and this project that we're working on is. And then transition that into the conversation, continue the conversation that you and Blade were having, Alec. So first of all, Stamp Paid, I mean, kind of a working thesis for the company that I have, like our mission is to just explore our curiosities and explore our curiosities and try to articulate or understand how those curiosities help us better understand our humanity. So when it comes to cultural appropriation, I mean, cultural appropriation is a very real thing. What I hope I never do, in terms of if I'm being if someone is going to accuse me of being a gatekeeper of my culture, I hope it's never attacking somebody who is coming from a place of humility, coming from a place of curiosity, and coming from a place to like just expand their understanding of the human condition. What I what I see as appropriation is when people exploit a culture that is not their own for their own gain and only for their own gain. So there's a cynical side of it. And that gain can be economic gain, it could be social capital. It could but you mentioned it earlier, Alec, like you can feel it when it's happening.
Yeah.
And some people might feel it, and they might legitimately feel it when another person doesn't. Like, those are messy conversations. Like, those Absolutely. Can be messy conversations, and I think the best we can do is just, engage in those conversations on the level, in good faith, be intellectually honest, and then if those things are happening and we still disagree, be amicable about our disagreement. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts to that?
No, I mean, again, you phrased a lot of what, not only what I was thinking, but what beyond what I was thinking, in a way that was far more coherent and concise. But yeah, I guess being just open to those conversations was the gist of what I was trying to get across there. But again, I'm always just happy to listen and just to be.
And real talk, I'm just speaking personally. It's something I genuinely admire about you. Is you are one of the best listeners I have ever met. And I mean that sincerely.
I don't know. I feel bad now. Every time I've zoned out in a conversation. I'm like playing them all back in my mind. I'm like, shit. I can't live up to the praise.
I'm just gonna move on from that. And to the bad faith conversations. I do want to say this. I think it was from the show The Sopranos. The lowest form of conversation is remember when. I think the laziest form of criticism is just poking holes. Yeah. It's just being destructive with no intention of building anything or being constructive. And so in my experience, engaging with stories, like professionally, there are a lot of people that they just point fingers because it makes them feel better about themselves.
Yeah.
And I'm not interested in engaging with those, like in those types of conversations. If there's a real like, I am genuinely always, if I'm causing harm intentionally, and especially when it's unintentional, and when I'm being made aware of my blind spots, like I'm here to, I want to learn,
yeah.
and I'm gonna always do the best I can to not put that onus on on someone who's marginalized to do that learning and do that growth on my own. And when I'm receiving feedback where I'm being made aware of my blind spots or unintentional harm that I'm causing, like I want to grow from that. If you're just gonna throw rocks, the proverbial you, if you're just gonna throw rocks to, because you have nothing interesting to say, I'm not here to engage in that conversation.
Yeah, it sucks though, because I feel like so much discourse online is just throwing these proverbial rocks at one another. Again, one thing, Blade and myself, we've been making shorts for Project Base of ours, and it seems like there's really only two responses to it, which is one, this was really, like, we really enjoyed this, or like, you made us think about something in a different way, or even just this was really funny to watch, right? Or you guys are stupid, stop making content. And there's no in between. It's crazy. There's no like room for constructive feedback. It's either we like it, good job, or you suck, delete your account right now. We don't want to see your face anymore.
Yeah. Well, let's get back to curiosities. No, I really hear that. I'm just like, it makes me sad. So let's not let it make us sad. Okay, so Stamp Paid.
Sure.
It's like the name of our company. We just recently incorporated Stamp Paid Podcast. This is the project that we're doing, exploring our curiosities and trying to articulate why those and how those curiosities help us better understand our humanity. Are you familiar with who Stamp Paid is in literature?
So I have read Stamp Paid is from Beloved, right? Beloved.
Beloved. Yes.
Yeah, and I'd read the novel, but to be honest, it was one of those things. I read the novel. I loved the novel when I'd read it, but you said the character, and I didn't remember the character from the novel.
Because Stamp Paid is not. I mean, is a secondary, maybe even tertiary character.
Yep.
So the novel Beloved by Toni Morrison, it's published in 1987. Not going to get into the novel, like the plot or even the story. But if you've read the novel before, do yourself a favor and read it again. This is like anybody.
Yep.
And if you've never read the novel, then read it and then wait a couple of years and then read it again.
That's where I'm at. Yeah, I want to read it again, train.
And let me just share this, and then I'll do a brief analysis of Stamp Paid, and then we'll get back to like how it relates to this current topic that we're discussing in this episode. When I reread the novel, like within the past year, what I did was I read the novel as I listened to the audiobook. And the audiobook was narrated by Toni Morrison herself.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I listened to it at 1.0 speed. I listened to it as she read it, as she recorded it, and it was really life-changing. Like, I don't mean to be hyperbolic. I'm saying that with all sincerity. Like, hearing Toni Morrison give life to the characters that she wrote and tell the story that she summoned, and just where she paused in the text and the voices that she gave to her characters, and like it was really life-changing. So like I wanted to share that. Like,
absolutely,
it was powerful. The Stamp Paid is a secondary, maybe even tertiary character, and within the context of the plot of this novel, this fictional story, he was a formerly enslaved person who changed his name. And what I found so compelling about the character, so Stamp Paid is like, he's paid his debts. He doesn't have to carry the weight of his trauma, of what's happened to him in the past. He has a new slate. And he's trying to he's trying to rediscover his humanity and not be defined by the sum of his past experiences. And those past experiences were not just things that happened to him. It was things that he's not proud of. It was anger that he internalized, pain that he internalized, that he in turn hurt people. Yep. Like, his past experiences wasn't just that he was a victim. It was also that I didn't deal with things in the way that I'm proud of. And I hurt people that I cared about. And I hurt people that I don't know. And part of his redemption, or his effort to redeem himself in this fresh start, changing his name to Stampede, was to just do better. No one's going to be perfect, but like trying to do better. And I love that, contextualizing about, within the context of talking about engaging with cultures that are not our own and appropriation, and just us on this journey to try to better understand our humanity. And this is why I love fiction so much. This is why I love storytelling, is that at its best, storytelling, it's not didactic. It doesn't tell us this is what it means to be a good person.
Yeah.
It reveals, like, this is one way to be human, or this is one aspect of the human condition that maybe, like, I never thought of it that way before. And I have a whole new understanding myself, or I have a whole new understanding of you, or a whole different understanding of my brother. Like,
absolutely, yeah.
In a way that I never thought of before. And I'm so grateful for just art, and specifically storytelling, like, for giving that to me. That wasn't, I'm just talking to you.
No, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Like, please respond whenever you have an idea.
You're just saying everything so beautifully. I'm just kind of lost in it right now.
Is this one of those times when you're zoning out?
Not zoning, no, I swear.
I'm playing with you. Okay, so taking it to what you and Blade were talking about earlier in this episode, this would have been a roundtable discussion. We need to find a more permanent recording location.
An actual round table.
Yeah, a round table, and then we need a third mic.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would have been there in the moment with y'all.
Passing off the mic, yeah.
Hey, y'all, it's episode 3. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're making it happen. You said something at the beginning of the episode about when you watched Spirited Away as a child.
Yeah.
It opened, there was just little details, visually in the story, where you're like, oh, I want to know what's behind that curtain. There's these possibilities to you. There is something, and then Blade was talking about kind of the Western structure of, the plot of the story.
Yeah.
The 3-act structure, the rising action, the climax, the resolution, all that kind of stuff. Or rising conflict, however you want to describe it. Just a little personal narrative, and speak from the I perspective as much as possible. I don't want to expose too much of our family dynamic.
Sure.
But what I will say is our grandfather was an engineer. And you can share, whatever you want to share beyond that. But our grandfather was an engineer. Loved my grandfather very much. But something that I was thinking about when y'all were talking about that is, I'm forgetting the person, but it was a conversation I was listening to about Miyazaki, and they were just talking more broadly about storytelling in general, and they created this dichotomy saying that a story or a movie is either a puzzle or a dream.
Yeah. And
I don't think that's true for all things, but for the context of this conversation, I was definitely raised, at least with the grandfather that we share, in an environment where life is a puzzle. And it's our job to fit things into that puzzle.
Yep.
And there's a perfect picture that works. And anything you want to explore beyond that picture that we're building, it doesn't really matter. And there's a lot of value to that.
Yep.
And there's also a lot of value to approaching life as a dream.
Absolutely, yeah.
So being a white person growing up in Western civilization, were you aware? First of all, is that context connecting you with you in any type of way? And if so, were you aware, like at a younger stage, like were you conscious of this idea that like I'm being raised in kind of an environment in Western civilization that approaches society more as a puzzle to fit into as opposed to a dream to explore?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely. So, our grandfather is an engineer, but my father is also an engineer, and I think lived life in a pretty similar way. Approached life in a similar fashion, right? That it's a puzzle. You fit your piece in, you play your part, and that's it, right? You go from point A to point B. There's not a whole lot of in between, and so I definitely, definitely felt that growing up as well. I will say that my mother, on the other hand, does not approach life as a puzzle. She is an artist who's definitely approached things more so as a dream. She doesn't really, she has no end point or start point. She just kind of explores, right? Mm-hmm. And so I do think that I resonate, not from, I guess, the cultural standpoint, but more so just from like the who I was raised by, with both those ideas of a dreamer as well as a puzzle. I think that those are both present in my life, maybe not from the same cultural standpoint, but more so just from I guess a general approach to life, if that makes sense.
Absolutely makes sense. And this is definitely one of those questions I'm genuinely asking you.
Sure.
But I want you to ask me at the end because
I
started with an answer, and I want to see if we're thinking the same way. Well, because you and I both have like a genuine love of cinema. So are there Western filmmakers, and specifically, well, for you, I'm going to say specifically like white filmmakers who you would say like the stories they tell, the movies they make are dreams and not puzzles. So the best example of a filmmaker, in my opinion, the best example of a filmmaker who like every one of his movies is a puzzle is Christopher Nolan.
Absolutely,
yeah. And like he made a whole movie about dreams.
And it was a puzzle.
And
yes.
It was a puzzle.
Yeah.
I think I like Christopher Nolan more than you do.
Yeah.
I love Christopher Nolan, so this isn't saying one is better, but
no, absolutely. Yeah.
I think he's an example of a filmmaker who his movies are puzzles.
Yep.
Are there examples of Western filmmakers, and specifically white filmmakers, for whom you would say their movies are dreams in the same way Miyazaki's films are dreams? Not in the same way.
Okay, I would say, I don't know, yeah.
Miyazaki is one of one, but...
Yeah, well, because when you said that, the first thing that came to mind was probably the Coen brothers for me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Well, I think that they have such again, their films do not have the same, I mean, they do actually have, like, they're pretty fluid and organic. They don't follow, like, oftentimes standard narrative conventions. Even, like, some of their more, like, serious and dramatic films like No Country for Old Men, the narrative structure of that film is, like, kind of, like, it's so interesting to follow because there's not, like, I mean, you do have, like, what is it, the incident, gosh darn it. You have
like the conflict?
Yeah, you have your introduction of the conflict, right, where he comes across this briefcase and he's being chased by a hitman. But apart from that, it's really more of like a character study piece. But the films that I was really thinking of when you asked that question were films like Inside Llewyn Davis, which is a film that really is just a study into somebody who wants to be an artist, right, and has these lofty dreams, and just makes all of the worst possible decisions possible to everyone around them, right? Just a genuinely terrible guy, but who is still has the heart of an artist and really is trying to express himself through his art. And so I think that the Coen brothers...
And there's that cat.
And there's that cat. That broke my freaking heart. When he locked that cat up, I shed a tear in that theater. A single tear, of course, yeah. Just for dramatic effect.
One really quick side story about that movie. When I saw that movie for the first time, and like when I saw that movie in theaters, a woman in my row, like an older woman, had a heart attack, like within the first 15 minutes of the film. So they had to like stop the screening and.
Jesus.
Yeah, I will always have a memory of that movie. But I digress. Continue.
That's horrifying.
I think she was okay. I didn't know. I didn't see her at the hospital, but she was alive when they took her out. I'm terrible. Okay.
That was like, she was okay. I didn't actually know, but she was alive when they took her out.
She didn't die on the spot. I hope she's okay. I'll put it that way. Okay, let's continue. So, Inside Llewyn Davis.
Inside Llewyn Davis, but films like The Big Lebowski or Raising Arizona, I think that the Coen brothers do approach their films not as puzzle pieces. They're trying to lay out. Again, I think that they maybe live somewhere on the spectrum. Like if here's Christopher Nolan, here's Miyazaki, I'd say they're somewhere in this range, right? Where they still have like basic narrative elements that they follow. So does Miyazaki, of course. But their films are just. It feels like they have a singular idea that they want to explore, right? Like, what would a week be in the life of a Greenwich film or Greenwich singer-songwriter, right? And so we follow this folk singer-songwriter for a week, and we really see them try to pursue their life, and we understand this person in his the full complexities of what it means to be this person, right? We may not be following any strong narrative threads really. There really aren't many. There's one where he has to go audition for to get a reoccurring gig. But I mean, it's a pretty loose narrative thread, and it's more so these unique character studies. Again, same thing with The Big Lebowski. There is a narrative thread about it's a case of mistaken identity, right? Mm-hmm. But apart from that, it's really just the hilarious antics of this man who was hit rock bottom, but in my eyes is the top of the top, right? The dude is living the life, but it's more so you're following this character and. As he's kind of exploring what it means to almost not have a purpose.
Yeah.
And so I think that the Coen brothers do it in an interesting way, but you wanted me to ask you the question in return in a very natural way.
Well,
so.
Yeah. I mean, listen, this is completely authentic, but I do want to respond. I wasn't thinking of the Coen brothers at all, but I totally see what you're saying. And even like you brought up No Country for Old Men. Earlier with Blade, you were talking about like Seven Samurai, the Kurosawa film, and how that's in conversation with John Ford. And like something I always say is that storytelling literature is in conversation with itself.
Absolutely.
And then y'all were kind of talking about like the collectivist versus individual, like in terms of like Japanese culture and like American culture in storytelling, or like Inside Llewyn Davis. So what I'm saying is like, No Country for Old Men is a Western. Yeah. But it's not like the lone cowboy comes in to save the community.
No.
It's definitely not a hero's journey.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's in conversation with Westerns. Like it has a knowledge of
the genre of
Clint Eastwood.
Yeah.
And
John Wayne
and John Wayne and John Ford and
Sergio Leone. Yeah, absolutely.
And Seven Samurai.
Yeah.
Like it has a knowledge of them, but it's like, flipping on its head or deconstructing it, like whatever you want to say. And I understand No Country was also a novel by one of the great Americans. Like I understand all that. And then with Inside Llewyn Davis, like that's not a hero's journey. Like he's he's not an impressive person by any means. Bob Dylan is in the film.
Yeah.
Like a throwaway at the end of one of his auditions, and it's not about that. No. You know what? So like I do find that fascinating.
And even like with Inside Llewyn Davis, you brought like the hero's journey is interesting because he starts the film and ends the film in the exact same spot. Yeah. Like there's been no growth.
So if you talk about a character arc, like there and that is fascinating.
Yeah.
And so that leads me to something I wanted to bring up with Miyazaki. This could be recency bias. I am also generally a person where especially like y'all were describing like virtuosos earlier in the conversation, with true artists, I'm someone who like, even if it might not be their best work, like I will usually say my favorite work is the most recent thing they've done, because I love artists that like don't try to just reproduce the hits, but explore their curiosities. And you're talking like Miyazaki, every film he's made for the last 30 years has been the last
Yeah,
one.
I'm done, yeah.
It takes it all out of him, but his most recent film, The Boy and the Heron, are you familiar with the like non-American name for that film?
Yeah, How Do You Live,
How Do You Live? Like, I thought that was fascinating. I forget the Japanese name, but for like, the Boy and the Heron, the non-American release, the translation is How Do You Live?
Yeah. Which is based on a novel.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, acknowledging that.
Yeah.
So what I love so much about that is, you know, you talked about Miyazaki, like his stories are hopeful, even if he seems
Yeah, absolutely.
pretty pessimistic, or if not pessimistic, like discouraged about the reality of the world and the protagonist and the boy and the heron. Like, given the circumstances of the world that he was witnessing, like that pessimism or that skepticism, like I can certainly understand feeling that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, I just thought, you know, how do you live? Like, I feel like that's what storytelling is about. Mm-hmm. And what I appreciate, this isn't the only way, because I love puzzle stories. Just as, like, they have a place too. They really do.
Totally. Yeah.
But what I love about dream stories, if we're using that dichotomy, is for me, they give me permission to imagine how I might live my life. Mm-hmm. There's no one way to live. There's no even one way for me to live. Like I have. It gives me permission. I can give myself the grace to like imagine how do I live this life that I have.
Yeah.
And I thought The Boy and the Heron was just a beautiful exploration of that, and connecting that to like what you're saying about the Coen brothers. You know, the dream world or whatever in the Boy and the Heron, where he was going to be replaced and like carry the weight of the universe on his shoulder.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't do that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, he chooses to not, to take over this dream world where, again, he is creating this world from scratch, but it chooses to live, back in our troubled, oftentimes confusing world. He makes that active choice.
Exactly. And I think that's so beautiful. And like, whether it's the dude from The Big Lebowski or like Inside Llewyn Davis, it's like for a story to be compelling, or for a life to be worth living, like if I'm thinking about it to myself, like giving myself that grace, that permission, or even that challenge to like not be exceptional, mm-hmm. to not, not be the hero of any story.
Yeah.
Just like be a person witnessing the beauty of life, or just the complexity of life, and just noticing that complexity. Like, yeah, that's what came up with me when you brought up the Coen brothers, and then I was thinking about The Boy and the Heron.
Yeah, I mean, I think I told you this story, but it's not a story. But when Miyazaki was first being asked about making this film, he's talking about How Do You Live, the novel that it's inspired on, which is it's a really interesting book. Have you ever read it? Or it's
I have not.
I super recommend it. It's like 100 pages too. Super easy to read, okay. But it's it follows this young boy growing up in early 20th century Japan, right? And you kind of see the ups and downs of his life, but interspersed throughout it, he'll go through an experience, and then there's almost an essay of sorts that follows this experience, where the author like talks through the emotions and tries to like help this boy understand what this means, what his place in the world means, right? What does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to interact, to have friends with other people? He said he was so inspired by the book, and he wanted to create, a movie of his own that, for his grandson, who he may not, be able to see, grow into the person that they will become. And so he wanted to give them a little bit of his, knowledge, or at least even just a way of thinking and looking at the world. And so I think that is super important to have, film that has, because we were talking about film that, you're able to put your, almost like imagine a world within it, but also a film that has such a strong message and such a strong narrative that it gives. And again, there's such a personal and meaningful reason that Miyazaki had to make that film. I think it's very apparent on screen while you're watching it.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. So my answer to the Western the dream storytellers.
Yeah.
So the first person that came to mind when I was just listening to you and Blade have the conversation was Terrence Malick.
Oh yeah.
And that's if y'all want to call me pretentious, like fine. I genuinely love Terrence Malick.
No, he's great. Yeah.
But the other person, this leads into kind of the framework for the this next part of the conversation that we're going to have, and then I think like unless something else comes up, we can end it at that. And this is a black filmmaker, Spike Lee. Like I think, again, if we're using the puzzle versus dream dichotomy, I think Spike Lee, like his stories are dreams.
Yeah.
Like the way his movies look. You know, if we're talking about Do the Right Thing and just like A Hot Day in New York,
yeah,
and like everyone's like, you know,
that even goes to like what I was talking about earlier with like in The Boy and the Heron, where the opening scene, you're watching almost like the world melt around him, and it's like using animation to capture the feeling of it versus the reality of what that is. Totally, like Do the Right Thing is like capturing not the reality of what that looks like, but the feeling of what that is.
The feeling of it, and then like I don't know, like a dream state, like even like Samuel L. Jackson's character, like wake up, like he's saying that at the beginning on the radio, but the feeling like when it's hot like that, when you're hot that day, like you're just kind of going through the day. You're not super. It is kind of like you're going through a dream.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? So like Malcolm X is like even his dolly shots where you know like the person's moving like on the dolly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Like that he has in every film like that. That's kind of a dream. So Spike Lee's a dream, but this. Okay. Spike Lee, he tells Black American stories. And so, like, there's definitely a Western point of view, and there's a specific Western point of view. This is not Terrence Malick's point of view. This isn't, you know, this isn't the dominant narrative of Western civilization. So, again, let me contextualize some stuff. You know how I talk. Are you familiar with the show Atlanta?
Yes.
Okay. So there's a throwaway line in season 3 by the character Darius, played by Lakeith Stanfield, where season 3 is my favorite season, by the way.
I have not watched season 3.
It's all good, unapologetically. It's when they're in Europe. So like, they're taking like blackness and the culture of Atlanta, and like it's like what would that look like in Europe?
Interesting.
It's hilarious. I know it's not for everybody, but like I loved it. Yeah. So they're at this party with all these like woke Europeans, and Darius. He's like, his drink's on the counter, and he goes up to a woman who's Asian, and he's like, yo, excuse me. She's like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm engaged. And he's like, he was just asking for his drink. Yeah. And she's like, oh, I'm sorry, like black guys hit on me a lot. And this is a throwaway line, but it really got me thinking. He's like, well, it makes a lot of sense, like y'all, like he's like Asian people, broadly speaking, like y'all love hip hop, like we love anime, like it's a natural fit. But it's true, like Creed 3, like y'all were talking about, the conversation, like Creed 3 is a movie, like Michael B. Jordan, who directed Creed 3, talked about his love of anime, inspired like the visual.
Oh, I didn't know
the
that.
visual like choreography of the fighting and everything, so like it's a real thing. I was just thinking about like, if we're taking the character Darius has some insightful lines, in that there's like a character trope in storytelling, like especially in like Greek plays. I'm forgetting it right now, but like Darius is that character. But okay, if we just accept and language is inherently reductive. So all the qualifiers, I'm acknowledging all of it. But if we accept that like Japanese culture is and Eastern culture more general is a more collectivist culture, less individualistic, it makes sense to me in the same way that you were saying, you growing up, with your grandfather and father being an engineer in Western society, that there's something about you that gravitates towards like dream storytelling. Because so much of your life is telling you that puzzles are the way to operate. Yeah. So there's something lacking. So if Japanese society and just Eastern culture more general, if that's more of a collectivist society, it makes sense that like hip hop culture, which is about like pumping up, again, I'm being reductive. Much about hip hop culture is like finding your authenticity, finding your individuality, and celebrating your individuality, and not apologizing for your individuality. It makes sense why that is a natural fit. Yeah. I can only speak from the I perspective, but as a Black American, as a Black person in America, like I definitely understand that. But that collectivist ethos, that is something that I find appealing. Just the history of black people in America is that of like being separated from the family, that of being excluded from stability, just being separated from stability, and having a culture, even if I'm not aware of it, but having engaging with stories that are collectivist by nature, and where community is so important. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the thing that I've wanted my whole life, is just to find community, just to find like people where I feel at home with. So yeah, like when y'all were having that conversation, I thought a lot about that. And I just want to hear your thoughts, specifically, like, as a person who grew up in Western society, but you're not black. Like, just if any of that connects with you, or if like you think I'm off. If you think I'm off, I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
No, I mean, I think there is something that is quite appealing about it. About, given my my background and seeing these identities of life as a puzzle, right? Life is something that's figured out. You need to figure out what what you are doing, right? Or even these more individualistic ideals. And I think that is something that not only is lacking, but I think that it is, not to say that other media doesn't approach it in a specific, in a helpful way, but I think that Miyazaki, going back to Miyazaki, kind of gave it, I guess, the feeling of belonging, especially as a kid, which is something that, you're trying to figure out who you are in this world, and you're trying to see, like, for instance, in Spirited Away, Chihiro is somebody who you don't really know anything about at the beginning of the film. And I don't think that she really knows a lot about herself either, right? And I think that watching her come to, belong with this group of people, the group of spirits, and, come to who she is, but also come through her understandings of her relationship with other people, I think is something that's really, at least for me, was really enticing as a child, and something that I found very attractive, and something that I, obviously it stuck with me because I watched that film. That's probably the film I've seen more. I've seen that film more than probably any other film in my entire life. So no, I definitely think that there is something there for me. And hearing you talk about it, from your perspective and from where you're, I definitely see, not to go back to the puzzle pieces, but the puzzle pieces, they do fit in place there. So I think that, and even hear you talk about it helps me realize more so maybe why I've gravitated towards this media, because I've talked with Blade a lot about, he asks me all the time, Alec, why do you like anime so much? Which I think is totally a fair question. And why do you love Miyazaki so much, and why do you love Eastern storytelling in general? And I have lots of reasons, but I think even just this conversation with you has helped me come to understand another one. So for that, I appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you. And again, this is really like just kind of this ongoing project that will never be completed. Like, I really think there's value in this, and it helps me too. Yeah. I mean, that's why I'm doing it. But I do, and I hope the impact of what I'm saying doesn't sound defensive, and like I hope it doesn't sound like I'm arguing with like a straw man. To use fallacious reasoning. But in terms of that appropriation, like to go back to that appropriation piece, like I do really think it's worth considering, what is it, people for whom a culture that is not their own, like if they're just so fascinated, or they connect with that culture, like what is it that enables that connection? And I don't think there's a single answer. Like, no. I genuinely don't.
No, of course not.
But I think it's absolutely worth exploring that, because there is, I have come across in my life people who white people who are obsessed with black culture, and it's weird. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. There's a fetishization that might happen. There's like a voyeuristic nature that might be there. Like, there's a weird thing, but I want to say that exists, but I think it's number one, not true, and just intellectually lazy, and really reductive to just assume that and dismissive, to assume that anyone who really connects with the culture that is not their own, that they're being problematic in some way or just being weird. Like, no, like, again, and I didn't grow up like my brother. One of his favorite shows was like probably his favorite show as a child was Avatar: The Last Airbender. I mean, if not the, like certainly one of them. Like I wasn't into it. I wasn't into anime until well into my adulthood. You understand? I didn't watch a Miyazaki film until well into my adulthood.
Yeah.
So it didn't connect with me. But once it didn't connect with me growing up. Mm-hmm. But at this stage in my life, once I was introduced to it, and then I also had my journey, like internalizing Spike Lee's filmography, reading about just Black American identity. There is a connection here that like it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Just like in terms of, you know, what Michael B. Jordan says about his love of anime, or you know Miyazaki's films being dreams. I'm like, man, Spike Lee's films are kind of dreams too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then just so I don't know. I hope the conversation, number one, is useful to you. I hope it was useful to Blade, and then anybody who comes across this conversation, like I hope it's helpful to them. I do want to acknowledge, like, you know, this conversation, like these conversations will never be solved.
No.
You know, like you can never talk about a thing completely.
No, of course not. Yeah.
But I hope it challenges people or inspires people just to like think about these things a little differently.
Yeah, I mean, it's again coming away from this just with more ideas to continue exploring. You know, a love of mine, a dream of mine, or passions that I have, or passions that other people have as well, and to understand the human condition just a little better. You know, in all of its complexities and nuances.
So I want to end with this because, like, I guess, kind of, Mia's like, if not Eastern, like the differences and similarities of Eastern and Western storytelling, I feel like Miyazaki was kind of the inspiration for this conversation.
Yeah.
So I just want to ask, like, for anybody who might be listening, who wants to get into Miyazaki or wants to revisit Miyazaki. With the context of this conversation that the three of us have had, what are 3 films that you would recommend? 3 of his films that you would recommend, and why?
Got it. Well, I would recommend Spirited Away. That's the one when Blade asked me which Miyazaki films I would recommend. To him, Spirited Away was the top of the list, and I think that's a film that, I mean, not only does it capture the feeling of being in a dream. I think watching Chihiro as she descends deeper and deeper into the spirit bathhouse, it has the logic of a dream almost at times. But beyond that, just the approach to storytelling and these full-bodied characters that she interacts with throughout, and the messaging that can be both subtle, but once you kind of come to your own realizations, can almost be like so blatantly in your face, and almost help you understand. How you approach storytelling and how you approach. I think Spirited Away is my number one choice. Also, I cry every time. My favorite scene in all of cinema is the scene where Chihiro gets on the train with her and No Face. They travel through this spirit world, and it's just like the perfect, melody of this nostalgia for a place I've never had or never seen before in my life. Right? It's this like two-car train going through this like rural countryside in the spirit world, and you're just getting glimpses to what life is like there, and it's so like beautiful and melancholic. But again, I would rewatch Spirited Away just to watch that scene because it makes me cry every time. I also so my favorite Miyazaki film was actually Porco Rosso.
Okay.
Not only is it has some of the best like physical comedy in any film I've ever seen, which is not the conversation we're having here today. But if you just want to laugh, have a great laugh, that is the film for it. But I think that film is really great as a study of dreamers because it's looking at, specifically like the Adriatic Sea and the eastern side of Italy, right before the rise of fascism in Italy. And so even though it's a really lighthearted, fun film, it's about these people, the last days of before fascism takes over and before freedom completely changes, and before almost the innocence of this world and this region is lost. And so I think it's a beautiful, funny, and pretty. I mean, it is. There's a hint. It is melancholic, but it's pretty amazing. And then I think The Boy and the Heron as well, just because it feels like such a deeply personal work of his. And there's so much, I've seen the film 4 or 5 times in theaters now. And every time I kind of walk away with completely different understanding for what the film meant for me in that moment. And so I think that that is a good film just to watch if you, just to ask yourself, how do you live? Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, that's where I was going, but I didn't know. I was like, dang, is this going to be a little corny if I go there? So I'm glad you went there for me. But yeah, I'd say that those are probably 3 good ones to start with.
So, Porco,
Spirited Away. And,
Porco Rosso, right?
yeah.
Porco Rosso, The Boy and the Heron,
Yep.
and The Spirited Away
Yep.
is your forever recommendation.
Yep, those will be the forever recommendation.
Alec, I appreciate you, man.
Thank you. I appreciate you. This has been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Till next time.
Yep, till next week.